Okay, what's up, students, scholars, whatevers. I'm going to make a video on lesson 17, which is completing the square 3. This is a completing the square lesson around completing the square with fractions involved. So first and foremost, on the front of this page, you should have, the front of today's handout, you should have the steps. So the steps are here inside the box, steps 1 through 8. You can literally just follow this. It's exactly like all the previous examples. The only difference is it looks a little bit more complicated because of the fractions. Now, it's not more complicated, but the fractions sometimes make it look like it is. So I want you to always defer back to the steps if you're worried or you're having any trouble, okay? If you don't have a copy of this handout, you can always find one on my website at mrjcostello.com. You can go to Algebra 2 and then Files. So that'll bring you to my shared Dropbox folder where you can access copies of all the handouts. Now, I'm going to start with question number 16 from today's handout because I think it's a particularly interesting question. If I'm going too fast at any point, you can just slow down the playback. You can pause. My recommendation to you is that you, first things first, set this equal to 0 because the question is asking for the roots. Roots are also called zeros. These are the keywords that tell you to set the equation equal to 0. Now, I'm going to point out that technically there's like an invisible 1 here on this x term, and that's what's going to make a lot of this possible for you to understand that. Now, if you can follow the steps, the 8 steps, I would recommend pausing this video right now and finishing the question yourself. And if you get stuck, think on it for a second, and if you really can't overcome whatever's standing in your way, then play back this video and watch me go through the steps. Okay, if you're watching now, I'm going to assume that you've already tried question number 16. Maybe you've completed it, maybe you got stuck, but either way, I'm here to walk you through it. Now, this guy in front, this 3, makes things pretty complicated. We can't have a 3 in the front of the x squared. It can't be a coefficient on the x squared, otherwise we can't complete the square with it. So what we have to do first is we have to divide by 3. If we divide by 3 on one term, we have to divide by 3 on all of them, so let's get that out of the way. Those cross out, that's good. So I'm going to get x squared plus 1/3 x. Wrap your brain around that. I just decided to write this as a coefficient and put the x next to it. That's fine. So 1/3 x plus 19/3. And that's equal to 0. Now I'm set up. Okay, we're good. We're set up. I can follow the steps. Step 1 says move the c term over. So I'm going to use addition or subtraction. In this case, it's positive, so I'm going to use subtraction. So minus 19/3, and I have to do that on both sides. I now get x squared plus 1/3 x is equal to negative 19/3. Step 2. Step 2 says take the b and bring it into the sidebar. Now this guy here, the coefficient on the x, that's b. So I'm going to bring him over into the sidebar, do a little bit of work in the margins, a bit of a private conversation between me and math right now. 1/3. And I want to divide this by 2. 1/3 divided by 2. Now, if you have a graphing calculator, this is a really easy question to answer. 1/3 divided by 2. I think this is going to turn sideways when I do it, so I'm sorry if that's the case. I don't think my calculator works vertically like that, not the calculator app at least. So 1/3 is just 1 divided by 3 in parentheses. That's the fraction 1/3. And I want to divide it by 2. Hit enter, and I get 0.1666667. Now that's not a good number, it's not acceptable. We need to use a fraction. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to hit math, enter, and then enter. If that process is unfamiliar with you, changing a decimal to a fraction, you might want to write those steps down. Math, enter, enter. So it turns out that 1/3 divided by 2, when converted back to a fraction, is actually just equal to 1/6. So this is equal to 1/6. And that number is going to be important. So I'm going to put a little arrow with an eye on it. That guy's important. Now that I've finished dividing by 2, I need to square it. 1/6 squared. Now you can do that in a calculator, and then hit math, enter, enter, and it's going to give you 1/36. I need to add this number back into both sides, so I'm going to put plus 1/36 plus 1/36, and now I can factor the left-hand side. After we added that back in, what we get is we get 2 bubbles with an X in the beginning of each one. Now what goes in here is always going to be this, the important number up here, 1/6. So positive 1/6 and positive 1/6. On the right-hand side, I actually need to add these, but because they don't have common denominators, it can be a little messy. So I'm again going to go to my calculator. I'll write this and erase it. The way that you would type it into your calculator is like this. -19 divided by 3, that's the first fraction, plus 1 divided by 36. So that's how you would type it into your calculator in order to add these fractions. It's going to give you some ugly decimal, and you're going to hit math, enter, enter, and it'll give you a fraction. So I'm going to really quickly go to my calculator. I need to add -19/3 and 1/36. So -19/3 plus 1/36, and that's going to be equal to some ugly decimal. So I hit math, enter, enter, and what I get is -227/36. This is equal to -227/36. Now I'm down to steps 6, 7, and 8. The left side becomes a square. It's this times itself, right? So that's the definition of a square. So I'm going to get x plus 1/6 squared is equal to -227/36. In order to get rid of this square here, I'm going to have to square root both sides, and the square root will cancel out. When I rewrite, I'm going to have x plus 1/6 is equal to plus or minus the square root of -227/36. My last and final step is going to be to get the x by itself by getting rid of this guy. So in order to get rid of it, I do -1/6, -1/6. That crosses out. And my final answer is going to be x is equal to -1/6 plus or minus the square root of -227/36. Okay? If you feel like you understood that and you feel like you can follow the steps, why don't you go back to the beginning of the video, pause it, and try the question, because I know you probably didn't when I told you to before. Go back to the beginning and try all the steps without watching the video again. And then watch it to get you unstuck in case you hit a snag. Remember, tomorrow has a 1-question quiz as our due now, so take your homework seriously, and I'll see you in the morning.